All right, welcome in everybody to Legal Aid's Town Hall. With me today is Carlene Archer. She's a staff attorney in our Syracuse office. She covers specifically bankruptcy, and she's working in the student loan forgiveness space. And we thought we'd do a live. We reached out a couple weeks ago. We thought we'd do a live and do a town hall on the student loan forgiveness program, the news that broke in the Biden administration, just to update everyone on what's going on. And through some rescheduling, we are here today, and so here to talk about everything that's going on in the student loan forgiveness realm. Obviously, it's a huge, massive part of debt that Americans carry. A big majority of Americans do have student loans, and I recently saw a stat that it was actually there's a lot of elder senior citizens, growing number of aging Americans that have student loans as well, because it's carrying over. People are getting older and unable to kind of cover this debt that used to have a history of you couldn't declare bankruptcy on it. But let's kind of get like the who, what, when, where, why, how, and the basics of what's going on to date. Carlene, what has happened thus far with the Biden administration? I know there's some important dates. Obviously, there's been forgiveness up to $10,000, and then with the Pell Grant, it's possibly of $20,000. But just bring everybody up to date on what's been happening in student loans.
Sure. So we've had some major announcements at the end of August about this student loan forgiveness. It's something we've been waiting on for a long time. The Biden administration announced that folks with federal student loans would receive up to $10,000 in forgiveness, depending on their loan balance, and up to $20,000 if they had a Pell Grant, and that's subject to certain income limitations. So if you make under $125,000 or $250,000 if you're married, that's kind of who qualifies for student loan forgiveness. I just looked yesterday. That is a lot of people in our home state of New York. That's 2.2 plus million people will be eligible for that in the state of New York, and 1.3 million of those are Pell Grant recipients, so we'll receive that up to $20,000. That's a lot of money. We've worked with people who have student loans. The average student loan balance, I think right now, is about $40,000. So, I mean, that means that wipes out a lot of student debt for a lot of people. And we have a lot of people that money goes, that they were saving towards paying their student loan debt can now go towards repairing their homes and things like that. So it's really exciting for a lot of people. And one thing I want to note too, we've been in this pause on student loan payments for a couple of years now because of COVID. I had kind of a thought that they were waiting to suspend the pause or bring back payments until after they announce this forgiveness, and payments will be going back into action in January. But if you have made payments since March 2020 or whenever the pause started, you can get a refund on those payments. So if you had $10,000 in student loans as of March 2020 and used this time to pay it off as interest was not accruing, but now you're finding out, I could have gotten that forgiven, you can get that money refunded to you. So that will be part of the process as well. So you're not going to miss out just because you tried to use this time to pay off your debt. You're not going to miss out on the forgiveness.
Yeah, it's amazing how much news is broken just recently. I mean, there's been a lot of change in this space. Obviously, we were talking about on our first stream that the possibility of bankruptcy, I believe you said like a Chapter 7 being utilized as a possible forgiveness tool. And then after that, I think the servicers kind of started changing. And then obviously this finally the executive orders through the Biden administration, I believe it's gone through. And then and so now there's been some important dates that have popped up to the actual implementation of this forgiveness. What are you seeing in the servicer space? I think there's been some change in some of the big major student loan servicers across
Right.
the country.
That continues to be changing, but we did see that Navient, who is a major player in this space, has kind of gotten out, and we're seeing that moved to something called AidVantage. So if you're one of these people that didn't log into your student loans throughout the entirety of the pause, if you go log in now, you're going to find that you're going to have a new servicer. I would recommend logging in to your account as soon as possible and making sure everything looks right. And that's also going to, by logging in, you're also going to be able to see, your student loan balance to see how much forgiveness you might be qualified for. If you log into your studentaid.gov account, you'll be able to see if you had a Pell Grant. If you can't remember, if you went to college 20 years ago, like I did, then you probably don't remember if you had a Pell Grant or not. And so, so you'll be able to log in. And that's one thing, people have student loans for a long time. And there's a lot of things you don't remember about what your original student loans look like. But there's a lot of student loans that that qualify for this. It's really important to log into your studentaid.gov account. The other thing you can do there is log in and make sure your contact information is correct. Because again, we've had student loans forever. We've moved a million times. Make sure your address is updated. We haven't paid in 3 years. To make sure that you're getting updated information about the application when it becomes available, because apparently there's 8 million people that will automatically get this forgiveness. As of right now, 8 million people will automatically get it because these are people that have been sending in income certification for either income-based repayment or for public service loan forgiveness. So they've been sending in information, and the government knows about their income, and so they know they qualify. And so those people won't need to send in an application. I still would err on the side of sending in an application, but the application should come out in the next week or two. And if you sign into your studentaid.gov account, you'll be able to get an alert when that application becomes available. The government has said it's really important, especially if you're, because payments are starting again in January, to fill out that application before November 15th, because they're saying it's 4 to 6 weeks for processing of the application and getting the forgiveness done. We all know the government runs a little bit slower. If you can do the application as soon as possible, that would really help. And make sure everything's done before payments start, because your payments will be due in January, even if you qualify for that student loan forgiveness, if you haven't applied. And one of the other parts of that is if you qualify for 10 or 20,000, but you have more than 10 or $20,000 in student loans, after that forgiveness is processed and your loan balance is reduced, they're going to re-amortize your loan, which is really exciting because they'll basically put it through the process again to reduce your payment amount. So your payment amount is not going to be whatever it was with the $10,000 or $20,000 that's now forgiven. It's going to be lower based on your new balance. So exactly how that's going to work, it's really remains to be seen. And then if they don't process your forgiveness in time for the January payments, not really sure what's going to happen. Like if you only have 9,000 and you're due 10,000 in forgiveness and they haven't processed your forgiveness in time, are they going to refund that money? I'm not sure. We'll see how that works. I think just the important message to take away is to sign into your studentaid.gov account, get the indications when the application is live, and sign up, fill out the application as soon as possible. It's not really clear what you're going to need for the application. I would bet it's something like information that's probably on your tax returns from last year, including income certification and things like that. But it may just be, your social security number and some basic information. But it's important to get that application as soon as you can so you can find out where to get the information that it needs. I think you're on mute. Alex, I think you're on mute.
That type of day. All right. No, but logging into studentaid.gov, logging into your servicer, developing relationships with both of those entities, I think is kind of like really important what you're saying. The application seems to like it's going to be coming out in the next few weeks. So making sure that those logins are good, that they have all the updated information that they need, updated, contact information, updated address, etc. So you're ready to go when that application rolls out, because as you said, it looks like January 2023 is when the pause will be, I guess, lifted, and payments will start
Right.
coming due again. And you said 8 million people will be affected right away, so that's completely, that's impactful. And what kind of documents do you think people need to get ready? I think you mentioned a little bit of like W-2 forms for
Yeah,
showing
I'm
income, or go ahead.
sure. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much kind of hand in hand the Department of Education is going to be working with the IRS on this. I expect it's going to be some relationship with the IRS. It may just be your Social Security number, and they can, look up your adjusted gross income from last year with the IRS, or you may have to have your adjusted gross income from your last tax return. I'm not sure. We'll see what the application looks like. Maybe we can record another video to go through what the application is when it comes out, and kind of walk through what people will need. Historically, it takes a long time for different government departments to work together, and we'll see on this one. I know IRS and Department of Ed do work together pretty well, especially when it comes to finances. But we'll see what people need. And as far as documents that you might want to get, I think it's important. I used to work with loan servicers. I think it's always important to keep on top of what your loan history looks like. Particularly, there was this huge move from these former servicers to the current servicer. And that still seems to be going on. Your loan history can be really confusing when that service transfer happens. It doesn't mean anything nefarious is happening. It just means you might need to kind of go back and better understand and make sure that what your loan balance looks like is what it's supposed to look like. Because that's another thing you always want to kind of double check. If you're getting something like this loan forgiveness, you want to double check that it happened. So you want to be aware of what your loan balance is today, so that after the application is processed, it looks like it's supposed to look. I think you're on mute again.
Is there any way you can download your payment history, or history of what you've paid off on the loan, just for checks and balances, because obviously that money's being transferred over to another organization, another entity, I think is really important.
Yeah, you definitely should be able to do that. You should be able to do
Okay.
definitely what it looks like in the past couple of years. And it may be a little bit more involved to get your full loan history. I think that you can get that. There's a couple of databases that you can get that. I think one of them is called the National Student Loan Database, that you might need some personal information to log into, but you can always get that information.
Are you seeing any changes in the space in terms of the bankruptcy angle, or because everything's been on pause, is that kind of like, are the courts kind of like on pause there as well?
So I haven't seen any specific changes for federal student loans. Private student loans are going kind of the same way that they've been going. There's a couple of court decisions showing that private student loans that are for kind of over the amount of tuition are dischargeable in bankruptcy. It's been going that way for a number of years now. But in terms of federal student loans, we really haven't seen any movement in the past couple of years. It's a little bit up and down. But what I'm hearing from people who do kind of a lot of volume work in that space is that there's a lot of settlement going on with the Department of Education. They probably don't want you to know that, but it doesn't. Basically, there's no reason to not try to get your student loans discharged in bankruptcy if you're already filing for bankruptcy. So if you have kind of other issues going on, large medical debt, behind on your house payment, things like that, and you have that reason to file for bankruptcy, and you can kind of swing it to file the adversary proceeding or lawsuit inside of your bankruptcy case to try to get your student loans discharged, I think it's worth it to try. If you come to us and you qualify for legal aid, we definitely can try for you. It's definitely, I know it's more expensive to get it done with a private lawyer because it can be a little bit hard, but there are definitely lawyers out there who specialize in this kind of stuff, and they say it's not quite as hard as it used to be, and it's it's moving easier. At least for a settlement, you might not get everything wiped out, but you might get to a better place. There have been a couple bills introduced, either bipartisan bills. There was one a couple of years ago by Dick Durbin and John Cornyn, saying that student loans should be able to be discharged after a couple of years. And there's another one, I think by Josh Hawley, was introduced a couple of weeks ago. Those aren't going to make any movement. The Durbin-Cornyn one kind of has to be reintroduced at this point. And the Hawley one, I'm not sure it makes a ton of sense. It's really, I get, it's kind of a little bit performative. It's to show that he wants, and a lot of people want, schools to be on the hook for defaulted loans, which totally makes sense. I'm not sure that's the way to go about it. But that bill, I don't think is going to get a lot of movement, but I think we're going to be seeing a lot of bills introduced that have something like loans can be discharged from bankruptcy, but also this other thing to get schools on the hook for some. The Durbin and Cornyn bill had a similar provision, and it didn't go anywhere. But we'll see. I think there's going to be some movement there. We just haven't seen it yet. I think you're on mute again. Sorry.
All right. With that, I wanted, because we talked right before this, we were recording. It's a changing space, and so I wanted to know if there was anything. Do you see, or is there any challenges to this student loan forgiveness that you see from the Biden administration, either through the courts or through Congress? Is there anything that you see on the horizon that could threaten this?
That's a good question. And in a different era, I would say no. I would say this is kind of done. There's no court decision that can upend this, but I think things have just, I don't really know what the judiciary is going to do kind of at any moment. So there actually was a lawsuit filed today that, I follow kind of a range of people in the legal sphere to kind of get some perspective on it. And this is the one lawsuit that people think passes the standing issue. So basically, it's really unclear whether anybody has standing to challenge this, because you can't really, file as like an individual taxpayer, and the servicers might have some standing, but they also have this relationship with the Department of Education that they wouldn't want to, sue to stop this and upend that relationship. But one thing that's kind of interesting, this lawsuit was filed by somebody who qualifies for public service loan forgiveness. And he also qualifies for the $10,000. In his home state of Indiana, the $10,000 of one-time forgiveness is taxed, and public service loan forgiveness is not. And so that is his challenge. Basically, I don't want this $10,000 of forgiveness because I don't want to be taxed on it. I'm going to qualify for this full spectrum public service loan forgiveness. I'm almost at the end of my 10 years of payments. I want that. I don't want this and have to pay taxes. And that's what I think that's interesting. I think there's easy ways to overcome this from what I've seen. Like for public service loan forgiveness, folks, it's likely that those are going to be the 8 million people that automatically get this without an application. If the administration turns that off and requires an application or allows for an opt-out or something like that, this lawsuit's gone. So I don't know. That one's an interesting challenge, and I think it's valid. I think you have to have an opt out for those kind of folks that where their state says we're going to tax it, but they qualify for some non taxable forgiveness. You have to have something for those people, and this is the right challenge for that. I don't think it's going to upend the whole thing, and I haven't really seen anything specific that's going to upend it. It's coming quickly. And so any lawsuit that wants to stop it is going to have to happen quickly. And I haven't seen anything, but that doesn't mean I can't be surprised. So
Yeah. Huh. Are you
and
seeing anything?
that's just
Go
one
ahead.
more thing I wanted to note just about because a lot of people are talking about taxability of this. This in New York State, this is probably not going to be taxed. The state legislature passed something that says this is not going to be taxed. It's not going to be federally taxed. It will be taxed in some states. I think like Mississippi, Indiana, Alabama, some of those states. The forgiveness probably will be taxed, but not here in New York.
Yeah, interesting. So you mentioned a little bit about the fact that you're kind of seeing some movement on the forgiveness front and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I guess, are you seeing and you also mentioned the public service, forgiveness front that's been around for a while, but I feel has been like, from what I hear from colleagues and other places, it's been hard to obtain the amount of
Yeah.
documentation and kind of stuff to get the forgiveness from the public service or the NPO service record. 10 years, I believe it's 10 years plus plus payments, perfect
Yeah,
payment
it's
history kind of
120
thing.
payments.
120.
They don't have to be consecutive, but it's 120 payments.
Okay. Are you seeing any movement on that front are they starting to forgive those now more
Yes.
frequently?
So that's one thing. I am not the expert on public service loan forgiveness, but there is a huge deadline coming up that if you thought maybe if you've been rejected in the past because of the kind of loan that you had, which was a big thing, because back in a number of years ago, they did a study showing that 98% of the people that applied for public service loan forgiveness were rejected.
Yeah.
That's a crazy number. Probably, and it was largely because people didn't have the right kind of loan. And it's really, I think people don't understand how many kinds of student loans there are. And it's very confusing. It's very confusing. So there's, grad plus loans, parent plus loans, FFEL loans, direct loans, all kinds of loans, consolidated loans, everything. So if you did not have the right kind of loan for public service loan forgiveness previously, and you were rejected, you're coming up on a deadline that I believe is October 31st to reapply. And a lot of those requirements are going to be waived. And so that's in a month. And people who are in this space and may have qualified for PSLF probably know about this already, but just you should try again. It requires kind of like letters from your employers verifying your dates of employment, and there's verification of the payments that you've made. And so it's important if you think you might be one of those people to look into this a little bit more. Again, I'm not the expert on this. I've heard this date several times, and I've heard this issue about the different kinds of loans and making sure that you have the right loan. Because people were tempted. I think what it was people were tempted to consolidate their loans, and then that pulled them out of PSLF. I know when I had just graduated from law school and was hearing everybody, make sure you consolidate your loans because some of your loans have high interest rates and some of them have low interest rates, and it makes it easier. And then, of course, we all consolidate our loans without reading into, despite being lawyers, without reading into what that really means. And so I think that pulled a lot of people out. I'm not 100% sure, but there's waivers on a lot of those things right now. And I'm seeing and hearing a lot of people getting a lot of money forgiven because it's absolutely it's part of this program, right? You made 120 payments. You worked probably in a low paying job for 10 years and part of that deal was to get this money forgiven. And so, you'll see people working for legal aid for 10 years getting $170,000 forgiven. So you want to make sure you've exhausted that option before you do your application for this $10,000, particularly if you live in one of these taxable states. But definitely, if you have worked in a public service space for 10 years, see if you can get those loans forgiven or get some, credit towards payments. That's really interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of rule changes next year too, that haven't officially been put into place yet, but there's a lot of changes coming up in student loans for forgiveness and for all kinds of things, forgiveness, repayment, discharge, all kinds of things. I think they're starting next July. So there's going to be a lot of changes coming up.
All right, very good. Interesting stuff on the public service front. So sounds like we want to be on top of that as well and get that application in as quickly as possible. Do you support kind of like a all the above approach, like when approaching this kind of like debt? Do you kind of like, obviously some of it's not maybe possible for folks to obtain a lawyer and try to go through the bankruptcy side, but like, the student loan forgiveness side, the side that where we're I said developing relationships, but I mean it's basically logging into your account and updating your stuff at studentaid.gov and servicer. Is that the approach that you think people should take? And yeah, where do you see this space changing? Like, do you see student loans? Do you see it being forgiven more readily? And yeah, I'm just interested.
Yeah,
do you
no,
think there'll be another round of forgiveness?
That's a good question. So I think that first of all, as far as what your approach should be, I think you should exhaust all of your options. Here's kind of my personal view on it. As like a former corporate bankruptcy lawyer, companies do this kind of stuff all the time, right? You should not feel bad for trying to restructure your own personal debts. People enter into agreements and then try to restructure them later all the time. It happens constantly. It employs tons of lawyers. It employs a whole industry. Companies do it all the time. People should do it too. Your circumstances change. You entered into these agreements a lot of times you were 17, 18 years old. You went through, speaking for myself, I graduated from college in 2007. If you think about what has happened in the world since then, we went through a major recession. Things are just completely different from what they were in 2003 when I started college, right? And I just paid off my student loans 9 months ago. So in those years, from 2003 to 2021, you think about how much has changed in the world, and loans for corporate entities and for people who make a lot of money, they change all the time because of circumstances, personal circumstances in the world. There's no reason to not exhaust all your options, to restructure your loans, to try to hold the government to its agreements with these public service loan forgiveness. A lot of these people entered these like high stress, low paying jobs that service the public. And part of the deal was that they would get their student loans forgiven after 10 years. So we should hold the government to that agreement. And part of this waiver is part of that, is part of holding the government to that accountability. There's also, income-based repayment, which is that's a huge change for this forgiveness, where everybody has been talking. I should have mentioned this earlier, but everybody's talked about this $10,000 and $20,000. Well, they're lowering the amount of discretionary income that is going to go towards student loans for income-based repayment. And for a lot of the people, so just like personal stories, when I was trying to apply for income-based repayment with my husband, we got to a point where, he was in residency, and we were looking at it. They counted my income, but not my student loans. And so they were quoting us this huge amount of money to pay towards, his student loans. And some people I've seen hold off getting married because of that. And so I've seen people like they're able to get married now because it's going to be a lower amount of their discretionary income going towards their student loans. And I mean, these kind of things are a big deal, and it really is exhausting all of your options. So exhaust your options to restructure it, to pay it, and to work it within your life. And as part of that is a big change. And I think that sort of I think this ability to restructure these loans is really what's going to change. I don't think there's going to be another forgiveness, at least, in the near future. They keep calling this the one-time forgiveness. I think that's probably right. But I think what they're going to do instead is expand the options for discharge and forgiveness. They've been doing that. So kind of starting day one of the Biden administration, they expanded total and permanent disability discharge and lowered requirements for that, and kind of did, a check to make sure to, instead of these, huge applications and income monitoring and all of this health monitoring for totally and permanently disabled folks. They just made it kind of a check with the Social Security Administration, which is a big deal. And that helped, I think it was like 338,000 people get rid of their student loans. And these are people that were totally and permanently disabled. They're just not going to pay their student loans. And I think this administration is being honest about who can and can't pay their student loans. And they don't want to spend money on collections efforts for people that cannot pay it. And that's like the business mind of it. And there's the altruistic mind of kind of freeing people from that ball and chain of student loans. And I think they're going to further expand this idea of maybe you'll be able to refinance your federal loans with the government instead of refinancing it with a private company, which would be huge. We're seeing interest rates go up now, but as interest rates come down, we had student loans that were in 8 and 9%. I mean, and interest rates, a year ago were 2 and 3%. If we could refinance them with the government, that would save us a lot of money and, keep those loans with the government. Maybe we'll be able to do that. And then I do think that bankruptcy is going to be an expanded space where more student loans are going to be forgiven. Because, I mean, it's really, really hard for a lot of people to get their loans forgiven in bankruptcy. But with basically I'm being a little bit facetious, but with like $400 and a $50 application or 50-page application, you can get thousands and thousands of medical debts and credit card debts forgiven. And it's particularly for private student loans. I'm not sure why there's I know why there's such a huge difference, but there shouldn't be that huge of a difference. But I think what we're going to see again, instead of this kind of one-time, one-check forgiveness, it's going to be more options for restructuring, more options for discharge, and more options for kind of longer term repayment.
Yeah, I think if you reframe it as a way, because I know it's tough and it's like, it's organizing payments. It's a drag. It's trying to find, the history of the loan, how it came to be now, who were the servicers in the past, what kind of loan was it? I was 18 or 17 when I filled out the FAFSA form. It was, there's this long, massive history. So, but if you think of it and reframe it as like you're paying yourself, there's going to be a reward at the end. I think just reframing the mindset of the actual task sometimes, because I think in the moment we're so like, oh, I can't believe I have to do this, but like it's a process, and like the process of like, getting rejected or having a roadblock is kind of part of it. And obviously a lot of this, some of the servicers and some of the, it's that kind of like process of just continuing to overcome some of the stuff. What do you recommend people not do? I'll say that. Like the whole kind of like, hear no evil, see no evil, put your head in the sand. Yeah. That's not the thing to do.
Don't put your head in the sand. I know it's really hard. The way the world is, I mean, you and I were talking about just before this, we've got kids that are constantly sick, and, the world's in a weird place and everything. This is not something you can put your head in the sand about. You're not going to get this automatic forgiveness. Definitely, this is something you should work hard on figuring out, and definitely call somebody who who might know. It might be,
Right.
you call our office and we can refer you to somebody who does know. I know a lot of like church groups are actually having more like financial education, and they may have some more stuff about student loans. You may be able to call like your school. If you're still in school, you qualify for student loans as long as your loans came through before June of this year. But yeah, don't put your head in the sand. Don't keep this payment pause going. Don't like quit paying and not pay in January. If you can avoid any forbearance, do it. Apply for income-based repayment. A lot of people get $0 payments for income-based repayment. It's hard to do the income certification every year, but it's easier to do that than pay whatever your student loan payment is, because income-based repayment goes towards an eventual forgiveness. So you might not make enough money to make a student loan payment under the waterfall rules. So you're making $0 payments, and it's 20 years. It's a long time. It's 15 to 25 years, but at the end, your student loan balance is forgiven as long as you do the income certification every year. And that might be easier than making those monthly student loan payments. But again, like, do your best, exhaust all your options. This, one-time forgiveness is great, but for way more than half the people, it's not the end. So there's still student loans to be paid.
Okay. I want to make sure I'm not on mute. This was a ton of good information. I think if folks want to apply for our services, they can go to lasmny.org. There's a button on the upper right. It says apply for services. There's a application process, and it'll take in some basic information, some of the information we talked about, there might be some questions on, your income and proof of residency, things like that. Apply for services. That's the best way to go in terms of, that's the way I recommend applying for our services. You can also call our 1877 number that we share with our sister organization, Legal Services of Central New York. And that number is 877-777-6152. That number again is 877-777-6152. And my main punchline taking away from this is communicate with your servicer, go online and immediately make sure that you have an account and everything set up at studentaid.gov. I have student loans, so I took notes during some of this, and obviously the prospect of, some forgiveness on my end is really, really good. I, like you, have been out of school for a long
100 years.
time. Yeah. It's becoming, into the double digits and such. And yeah, it's just part of the process, and it's good to feel so hopeful that there's so many different options available, and kind of trying all these options and getting to a place where we're, especially generations of people are more economically stable, I think is a really good thing. So I'm hopeful that it continues, and obviously it's going to continue to be a process. So that's it. Carlene Archer. She's a staff attorney in our Syracuse office. Like I said, the best way to, apply for our services is to go online, lasmny.org, or the 877 number, 877-777-6152. Carlene, thank you so much. Anything else?
Thank you. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay. We'll end the broadcast.